everyone, welcome to Deltapath University. I'm Nick Burris, Manager of Professional Services. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to configure Deltapath's O365 connector. To start, we'll be going over some basic network and Skype for Business settings. Next, I'm going to be talking about the overall environment that we're going to be using. Finally, we'll go into the web UI of the O365 connector itself, and I'll go over all of the settings that need to be configured to bring the environment online. This includes setting up a SIP trunk, creating users, creating some basic routing patterns, and a few more items that we'll get to shortly. So let's get started. Before we begin configuring the O365 connector, there are a few items that must be considered. First, we need to determine how O365 connector will be connected to your network. We will discuss two network designs, typical and alternative. In a typical network design, the O365 connector unit acts as a firewall with one of its interfaces connecting directly to WAN and the other interface connecting to internal LAN. In the alternative network design, the O365 connector sits inside your LAN. With this configuration, you will need to port forward a WAN IP with one-to-one NAT mapping to the internal IP of the O365 connector. Next, you will need to allow federation on Office 365. To do this, log into office.com and access the Administrator Center. From here, click on Skype for Business, then Organization, and finally External Communications. Now, click on the drop-down arrow and select On except for blocked domains. The next step will be to configure a DNS SRV record for the O365 connector. Examples are provided on the screen for your reference. Lastly, let's discuss the configuration that we will be assuming for this POC. For the purpose of this demonstration, we will assume that a Cisco system with a CUCM and various endpoints is already in place. The CUCM is also responsible for routing all calls to and from PSTN. In this example, the O365 connector will act as the bridge between the legacy Cisco system and Skype for Business. All Cisco endpoints will remain provisioned to the CUCM, while any new endpoints, such as Polycom, will be provisioned directly to O365 connector. A SIP trunk will be configured to route all calls from O365 connector to the CUCM. The CUCM will also need to be configured to route specific calls to the O365 connector. Let's take a look at a few routing examples, starting with the route in orange. A user dials a PSTN number from their Skype for Business client. The call is routed to the O365 connector via the Internet. The connector then passes the call to the CUCM, which then sends it to PSTN to complete the call. Now let's take a look at the green example. A call comes in from PSTN and is passed to the CUCM. The CUCM passes the call to the extension mapped to the number as well as to the O365 connector. The O365 connector then routes the call to the mapped user's Skype for Business client. This allows the user's desk phone and Skype for Business client to ring simultaneously, giving them the flexibility to answer on their device of choice. Now that we've discussed some preliminary configurations and have discussed how the connector will be placed within the system, let's jump right in and begin configuring the connector via the web interface. Now let's take a look at our Ethernet settings. So we'll click FRCIP and we'll search for Ethernet and click on the icon. Now as we can see, this is a virtual instance and we've only configured one network interface, which is shown here. If we've configured multiple interfaces, they would be listed below, or if you're using a Deltapath hardware appliance, we would see all available Ethernet interfaces as well. Under Ethernet settings, there are a few options. You can choose to obtain an IP automatically, configure a static IP, or disable the interface. We recommend configuring a static IP. For third-party DHCP service, we would select No, and we want to enter the IP address, the net mask, and the broadcast of the IP that we want to assign. Next, we want to click on the Default Gateway tab, and we want to ensure our default gateway has been configured as well. We want to enter our default gateway IP, and we want to select the interface from the drop-down menu as shown. Once complete, we want to click the Save button. You'll notice that a note pops up, and it lets you know that you must restart the interface for the changes to take effect. We'll go ahead and click OK, and we'll go back to our Ethernet page. And from here, we want to select Restart Interface. Once the interface has been restarted, the changes will have taken effect. Next, let's configure our DNS. So we'll search for DNS and click on the icon. If you're using a private DNS server, you may enter that here. Otherwise, any public DNS server will work as well. Once entered, we can go ahead and select OK. And our DNS configuration update has been successful. OK, now let's configure general settings. Now to do that, we're going to click on the FRCIP button here. We can either scroll through to find what we're looking for, or in the search bar, we can type General Settings. That'll bring that up, and we can click on the icon here. So within General Settings, there are a few things that we need to configure. Now, if we want to see exactly what we need, we can click OK, and that highlights the sections in red. So first, we want to input a company name. Secondly, we want to select the IP of the server. Now, if we have an SMTP relay, we can fill that out here. In this section, we're going to leave it blank. And as well, if you have an authentication username and password, you can enter it here as well. So next, we want to set our time zone. So we can use the drop-down and scroll through, or we can search using the bar. Next, we're going to go to the Voicemail tab. And for Message Delete URL Address, we want to drop down and select our IP again here. Finally, on the Email Template tab, we want to go ahead and select Enable. Now we can also create an address. We can put a from name here and a from email address as well. Once that's complete, we can go ahead and click OK and select OK on the notice box. Now general settings are configured. The next thing we need to configure are our SSL settings. So again, we'll click the FRCIP button, and we're going to search for SSL. And click on the icon. Now once again, we can click OK to highlight everything that is required. So for connection settings, up at the top, we always recommend selecting Yes to force HTTP, but of course this is your choice. For country, we need to input our country code. State or province, enter this here. City, organization, and unit name. Next, we're going to click on the IP address at the top of the window, and we need to input a common name. And we can click Update after that. Now it takes us to our next window. Here we'll need to upload our certificate. So we're going to need a few things. We're going to need the CRT file and the .key file, as well as the CA bundle. Once you have these from a valid SSL provider, you can upload them here and click OK to finish the setup. So the next thing we want to configure are the federation settings on the O365 connector. So using the FRCIP button, we want to go to Integration Settings. As you can see, the domain is pre-populated since we've already configured our SSL certificate. The next item we need to configure is the permission group. This defines the permissions of calls coming into the O365 connector. Our recommendation is for internal only. This will allow all inbound calls to only reach internal extensions, and therefore they cannot call out once they reach the O365 connector. For federation, there are three settings. Public is open to all. Closed is only open to those mapped on Skype for Business to specific users. And trusted allows you to define specific domains. Now we can add as many domains as we would like using the green plus button. We can also take away domains by using the red minus button as well. Once this is configured, we can go ahead and hit OK. And OK once again to save the settings. Now we're going to configure our Cisco CUCM route via SIP trunk. So we're going to search for SIP trunk and click on the icon. Now in this scenario, we are connecting to a Cisco system using a Cisco Unified Call Manager. We're going to want to click Add SIP trunk. And we want to assign a trunk ID as well as a short name. We're going to want to input the IP of the SIP trunk. For port, we're going to use 5060 as standard. Mode will be standard. Protocol will be UDP. NAT support by default will be no. For registration options, we're going to leave it no for our example. However, if you do require an authentication invite, you can click yes and fill out the required information here. For call options, we are not going to place any call restrictions. For incoming permission group, we're going to choose internal only. Now for codecs, we offer quite a few that will vary depending on the trunk you are configuring. In this example, we're going to use 722HD, 11U and A, and G729A. For SIP options, we're going to leave everything as default. And in our case, there's no backup trunk at this time, so we'll go ahead and leave this blank. Once complete, we'll hit OK. Now our trunk to the Cisco CUCM is configured. The next thing we're going to configure is inbound routing from our SIP trunk. So we're going to search for inbound routing and click on the icon. And we're going to click on Add Inbound Routing. For our inbound peer, we're going to select our Cisco CUCM that we configured previously. For our inbound range, we want to enter the full DID range that Cisco is going to pass to the Deltapath connector. The internal extension range is going to be our internal extensions mapped to this specific DID block. In this case, it's going to be 0400 through 0500. For our actual DID range, we're going to input the exact same thing as we inputted on inbound range. Now keep in mind, this setup is for a block of DIDs. However, we can do singular DIDs as well. You would do them in the exact same way as we show here. We'll hit OK and acknowledge, and our inbound routing is now set up. So now we're going to configure outbound routing. We'll click on FRCIP and we'll search for outbound routing. Now there are two sections that we need to configure. First, we need to configure our PSTN outbound routing. Again, we can go ahead and click Save and it will highlight everything that needs to be populated. So first we need to select our country code. Next, we're going to select our context. In this case, we want to use PSTN. Now we want to input our international call prefix, as well as our local prefix. And for call accounting, we want to uncheck this box, and we'll go ahead and click Save. And OK. Next, we want to go to Outbound Routing List. And at the top, we'll click on Outbound Routing, or Add Outbound Routing. Now this is where we're going to configure all routes going out to the CUCM. For number, we're going to use a dialing pattern that is going to push all numbers to the CUCM. Now we can define specific number patterns as well, but for the sake of this example, we're going to define all. So for this pattern, we're going to start with underscore. We're going to use X, which is 1 through 9, and we're going to use period, which is all digits. For context, we're going to choose PSTN. We're going to send to SIP peer, and for our outbound peer, we're going to choose the CUCM. Now, in our example, we're not going to strip any digits or prepend. However, these options are available should you choose. Once this is complete, we'll go ahead and hit Save. And OK to acknowledge. Now our outbound routes to the Cisco CUCM are configured. Now let's take a look at user profile and users. To start, we'll take a look at user profile. In here, we can already see that there's a default profile created. So we'll click on the pencil icon to modify the profile. User profiles are used to set permissions and other settings for groups of users. For the sake of this example, we need to modify our Skype for Business call within user profile. The default is set to video gateway. However, for this POC environment, we want to set this to audio gateway. Also within user profile, you can select the ACL group, permission group, and a few other settings as well. There are also mailbox settings that can be configured. We also want to define the message delete URL address, and we'll select the server address here. All other settings for this example we're going to leave as default, and we'll click OK. Next, we're going to go to User and set up a few test users for our POC environment. So we're going to click on Add User. And once again, we can click on OK to highlight all the required fields in red. So we're going to pick an extension using a number from our DID block that we defined in inbound routing. So for this first user, we'll use 0400. Now the system can automatically configure a default password and PIN. However, if you would like to set your own, you can double click on this and type it in this field here. We'll need to define a name for the user. For customer, we're going to select System. For user profile, we'll select Default. Now for equipment, there are a few selections that we can choose from. We have Mac-based device, own CPE, analog line, Polycom room system, Avaya phone, Skype for Business account only, and mobility apps only. To start off, we're going to select a Mac-based device. Now let's assume we're provisioning a Cisco phone. We're going to want to enter the MAC address for that Cisco phone. Once we do that, we can see that the system automatically populates the model as Cisco. Next, we need to go over and select the exact model of the phone that we're provisioning. In this case, it's a 7945. We're going to choose our line number, as well as our registration IP. Once this is complete, we'll go ahead and select OK. And the system is going to provide us with our password and PIN. We can go ahead and select OK after that. Let's go ahead and add a second user. In this case, we'll use extension 0401. We're going to let the system define our login password and PIN. We'll enter a name here. For customer, we'll also want to select system. User profile, we'll select default. And this time, for equipment type, we're going to select Skype for Business account only. Now for this account, we want to map a Skype for Business account to this user. So under target account, we want to enter the email associated with this user. Once this is complete, we can go ahead and select OK. And once again, the system is going to give us our password and our PIN. Let's go ahead and create one more user. For this extension, we'll use 0402. Again, we'll let the system define the password and PIN. We will enter a name. Customer, again, will be system. User profile will be default. And in this example, we're going to choose mobility apps only, as this user is going to use our FRSIP mobile application. Once complete, we'll go ahead and hit OK. And OK to acknowledge the PIN and password. And this completes our user setup. Okay, so now let's take a look at how we can provision the endpoint itself. So in front of me, I have a Polycom VVX 1500. Now the way we're going to provision this will be similar to how you provision a Cisco endpoint as well. However, the menu system will be a bit different. So to begin, we want to ensure that the phone is set to factory default settings. Once that's the case, we can go ahead and start by selecting Menu, Settings. We want to choose Advanced. And the Polycom default password is 456. So we'll enter that here. Next, we're going to choose Administration Settings, Network Configuration, Provisioning Server, DHCP menu. And we want to make sure that boot server is set to static. Once that is, we can go ahead and hit the back arrow, and we can go down to server type, and we want to make sure that this is set to FTP. Next, we want to go down to server address, and we want to enter the IP address of the Deltapath appliance. In order to do this, we can select the Mode button, and we can choose to enter a URL or an IP. Once the IP address is entered, we can enter the server user. Now on the Deltapath appliance, under Equipment, Polycom Settings, within Provisioning Information, you're going to be given a unique SPIP number and password. Now on the phone, under Server User, you want to enter that unique SPIP number here. Once that's entered, we want to go ahead and scroll down to where it says Server Password. Here you want to enter that unique SPIP password provided on the web as well. Once these are complete, we want to go ahead and hit the back arrow, hit the back arrow again, and hit the back arrow one more time. And we want to go down and select Reboot Phone. Are you sure? We want to select Yes. The phone will now reboot and begin provisioning to the Deltapath server. So as we saw in our previous section regarding user creation, we can map a Skype for Business account directly to a user as we're creating them. But what if you want to map a Skype for Business account to a user that already exists? There is an easy way to do this. We'll click on the FRSIP button and we'll search for account mapping. As you can see, we already have one user that has a target account pre-mapped. 0401 has nicholas.burris@365.com. Now, what if we want to add a new target to another user? Let's go ahead and click on the Add button. We'll input our target. For mapping type, we're going to select User. And from this drop-down, we're going to select the user which we would like to map. We'll go ahead and click OK. And OK again. And our user is now mapped to this target account. We can also add and modify within this field. either by clicking the pencil to update or X to remove. See how easy that was? Thank you for watching today's video, and I hope you found it informative. Remember to click like and subscribe to stay up to date on all of Deltapath's videos. Until next time.